Yeah, it's not out of books.
Seeing the different agencies that have looked at your CV. It's an interesting job opportunity.
Well, we just got a briefing on Haberfield Garden.
Seeing the different
So confident we're going to get out of
This one.
What they say.
Yeah.
community relationships. And so the amendment 0.1a seeks to do that, including one that isn't listed, which was an important one for the former Leichhardt council area with Marion in East Timor. And these relationships should be initiated after an assessment of the willingness of the other parties to recommence the previous agreements. Obviously, after a 2-year hiatus, it's entirely possible that some of the former participatory communities in other nations may have moved on and decided they don't want to recommence a relationship with the Inner West Council, so that's something that would need to be investigated. And also there'd be new criteria for the establishment of new community-to-community relationships with a requirement for demonstrated existing cultural, social links between overseas communities and communities within the Inner West. Thirdly, that council seek advice from Chinese community organisations about a Chinese city that a relationship can be established with. I don't I don't think anyone can argue that the Chinese community is not a significant part of the inner west, and that's something that we should be seeking to uphold. And point two is that we're seeking to write to Multicultural New South Wales to get advice about the best practice for local government support for ageing, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. It seems clear to me that because of the nature and the pattern of migration to the inner west and the way multiculturalism has been established here over many generations and more recently gentrification, there is a very significant proportion of our migrant communities who are older people who moved here a long time ago, helped build the place into what it is today, and now have a very specific subset of needs, part of which is still based around language. But also we've got second and third generation migrants, their children and grandchildren, who are all over Sydney or all over Australia, but we still want to keep the link between them and their grandparents here in the inner west. And so I think that's obviously a priority for ethnic community organisations here in the inner west, and I'm sure all councillors in this room would express their support for the multitude of those organisations who do such terrific work. But it's something that I think we need to get some specific advice about what is the role for local government in that. Obviously, we're not the provider of aged care accommodation, but there may be other important things that we can be doing. So I'd like to, with Councillor Iskander, move that amendment. Councillor Passos, then Councillor Hesse.
Well, I can't go along with this, not at all. And when the West Council we sent a link job seeking. Every report I'm getting lately is that we're going to engage some person in some role. Are we an employment agency? I think not. And this must stop. And I cannot justify spending $90,000 on engaging somebody for multicultural purposes when half this council are councillors from different ethnic backgrounds. So if anybody needed to know anything, or I think they're very well looked after, and I'm sick and tired of people playing the racist card because there's no racism in the inner west, none whatsoever. There's no, just have a look around this table.
Call the meeting to order. Councillor Drury, if you could please refrain from interjecting.
So if this is a way that you think you can seek votes, sadly it doesn't work, because people have bigger problems than worried about racism when they're walking freely around the streets of the inner west without a problem. Now I'd like to ask a question, I don't know who to, maybe to Community Services through you, Mr Mayor. Yep. Maliana, are we financially supporting that area?
I'll put that question to the Group Manager.
Yes, through the Chair. So Council supports Friends of Maliana, which is a locally based not-for-profit organisation that assists with fundraising and community support to achieve outcomes through the Maliana Library for literacy and education purposes for the young people growing up in Maliana in Timor.
Do we give them any money?
Yes, Council allocates an annual amount of money to that organisation to achieve the outcomes.
Would you know offhand what that amount is?
Look, I would like to take that on notice. It's certainly something that I would need to give you an exact figure on.
Okay, because not taking anything away from the people of Maliana, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of areas that need support, and I don't know why. I think we should go back and have a look. Looking up and getting a bit of information on this place, I think they would rather toilet paper than money, because I read if you travel over there, bring your own toilet paper and towel. So let's make sure we know how we are helping these people. Let's look in our own backyard first. You keep grunting and carrying on, and I won't stand for it. Wait till you stand up and have the floor then.
You want to take me on, Julie? Brave.
Are you a chairperson?
I generally have to wait for a point of order, which I thought your colleague, Councillor Seedy, might have heard.
No, but I thought you might have heard him interjecting all the time while I'm speaking and grunting.
I'll adjourn the meeting if you prefer. Councillor Drury, I'll ask you to refrain. My job's not an easy one. I'd appreciate if on the first item of the meeting, the tenor of the meeting doesn't deteriorate because of any objections. Could you assist me with that?
I can.
Okay, thank you for that. If you could adhere to that, that would be great. Councillor Patters?
I have no problem with support for different groups in any way we can, by way of making available meeting places for them and anything else, helping them with what they want. But I'll stop at $90,000 to give someone a job. I will stop at that right now. And this has to stop. I am sick and tired of every report coming to this council. It's to employ someone.
Chair, a question first, if I may, through you to the General Manager, Group Manager of Community Services. A couple of years ago, I attended the Marrickville Festival, and I think we still listed at that stage that we had an arrangement with Zonnebekke local government area in Belgium, which is the local government area in which Passchendaele is located, which is the site in 1917 where about 125 men from Marrickville are still alive. So do we still have any connection with them? Should that be listed?
Through the Chair, we did investigate over the last 2 years. However, we can certainly take that on notice and see if there's any recent confirmed connection with that organisation. The office is in searching for the last three years or so. Didn't identify that as one of the formal relationships.
Can I perhaps add, when I was a councillor on Marrickville Council, just for a point of information, I had no authority to do it, but was rather prevailed upon to sign an agreement in 2007 when I attended the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Passchendaele at the invitation of the Zonnebekke local government area. And we had, Marrickville councillors, I'm sure councillors again at Marrickville agree, had an arrangement with them. It hadn't been formally agreed at that stage, but I know that I did sign an agreement. I had no authority to do so, but it would have been very undiplomatic not to do so. So perhaps that can be investigated. It was an important part of Marrickville's history. So I'm just flagging that, perhaps just for information. Look, I in general terms support this paper, but I do have some problems with it. I think, yet again, I noticed this last week, and I might particularly alert the General Manager to this. I think that these proposals would benefit from a more active engagement from councillors outside the formal council meeting. I think we would deliver better policy to go to our residents before that. I think the kind of processes where we have workshops and talk about these matters in detail, and this is not a criticism at all of the staff. The staff do what they're given, but I think when we have major policy matters, I think it'd be much better if we had a more active engagement from councillors. And I gotta say, I think one of the issues, and I know Sam Skander knows this, the issues I have is around civic receptions. I would have preferred a more detailed discussion around civic receptions before it goes, because I think it lacks clarity. And I think, frankly, previously on the old Marrickville Council, they were a bit of a rort. I understand from Councillor Skander that he has a different view on that now, and some of the things he wants to change, that's good, but I think it would be good to have a chat about that in a more constructive environment. This is too combative. And secondly, just in the amended motion that you put forward, Councillors Skander and Byrne, look, I think picking up the issue about supporting particularly our ageing communities. I know when I've had an opportunity to talk to Ms Ronan earlier about this, I had a chat with representatives of the Vietnamese community who have identified exactly what you're talking about, which is we have an ageing Vietnamese community where their children have moved out for a whole range of reasons, and they need the kind of support that I guess you're broadly hinting at. And I think it's certainly worth investigating that. And I think, again, that would be good actually to take it back to a more engaged, not a council or conference where we just get talked to, but where we have a more serious discussion about what our range of options really are. I think we have an opportunity to finesse that more usefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I certainly think the policy could do with a little bit more work, but that won't influence my vote tonight. I'll be supporting it. But one thing that did come out very clearly to me was we didn't sort of harness a lot of the multiculturalism within our business communities, and that is Leichhardt, Haberfield, have great strengths. Ashfield here has a wonderful vibrancy of Chinese restaurants, other Asian restaurants, and I'm sure there's Marrickville again. And we didn't sort of harness that within the policy, and I thought it was a missing element. And a question through the chair, would there be any opportunity to possibly strengthen those links between your team and our business team to maybe add some elements of that or tone into this policy? Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, very much so. Council is currently scoping its economic development plan, and that's going to be a very strong thread through the economic development plan. However, certainly through the exhibition period, you'll note that we'll be engaging the community on the initiatives identified in the former council or the council's resolution in terms of a lunar festival, in terms of quite considerable activations where the community plays a very key role in the development. But we'll certainly take on board the comment in terms of making those elements potentially more explicit.
Yes, I think this policy is starting to go in the right way, but I did have some concerns, mainly with the motion, because the policy seemed to be stronger, but in reference to multicultural communities, I think the key point we should actually recognise about the Inner West is it is a multicultural community. And I would like if that we can perhaps support culture-based groups within within our multicultural community. Just with regard to the diversity of cultures we have and the relationships with other communities, the Haberfield Association has mentioned forming a sister city relationship with a garden city in England. And I think that I wonder if that comes under this category too. I think the other thing that should also be recognised, as Councillor Stamoulis has raised, is the economic contribution. And I just didn't feel that that was captured in the essence of this multicultural policy, that we do have a diverse business community which come from very, very, very many different cultural backgrounds, and to also recognise that it's not just a migrant or a recent base. Certainly there's been a change in Australian policies, and I'm a beneficiary of, I guess, the 1970s change to multiculturalism from an earlier policies of assimilation, not only for the Aboriginal people, but for also multicultural people. And whereas there has been a diversity of peoples in Australia over a very long period, and I think that it would be useful for this policy to recognise that. There were refugees coming from Greece and Turkey after World War I. There's been, multiple cultural people here, and I think to quote Marine Faruqi, who just made her maiden speech in the Senate today, at what point are we Australian? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Look, the report comes in and basically we're going out to the community with this, and I think it's important that we do engage the community and show them that they are important, particularly the multicultural people out there, because there's been a lot of focus on this council on lifestyle choices as opposed to the people. And if you read the report, it clearly shows that 1 in 3 people are from a multicultural, multi-tongue. So they are clearly the largest in special interest group, although they're diverse in our area. So on that reason alone, I wouldn't fight against putting on someone, because if we're going to form these sister city type committee and these relationships, there's got to be someone who is going to actually run those things. In Marrickville, we had a person who was in charge. They would basically do so many hours. They're a community services person, and they were allocated the work, and they'd run these things. But my real concern with this report comes down to, when I read a report like this, it's not a notice of motion, financial implications. are you telling me that we're going to provide all these things with $90,000? Because it's not much good going out there to the people say, what would you like? And then it comes back and the raft or the scope of the whole project blows out to $1 million. Then we're going to be coming back in going, well, we can't deliver that. So I'll actually ask a question through the chair, the relevant officer. Is that the scope of budget for this project, for this whole thing? Or is that just the officer as it's written in here? And why isn't there an estimate of what the civic functions costed? Because at Marrickville, we used to give $7,000 to each community group to host a function. And it was run by the community groups. And the Italian group grabbed it and ran with it and hosted not an Italian function for the Italian community, but an Italian function for the entire community. And it was the greatest and the best success of any of these multicultural committees and functions. So I just want to know what the budget is actually.
The budget, and so the individual elements haven't been costed in this report.
So basically, people could say, yep, I want free beer every day, and we're going to come back and say the cost of this is going to be this, and we're going to say, sorry, you can't have free beer every day. Could be German, bit of Peroni maybe. I've got a problem with that style of reporting. I need to know up front what costs are for different sections and then add up and have a holistic view of what goes on. I'll still support it to go out to the community, but when we have to say, no, we can't afford to do this, or we're going to knock something else off along the way, that becomes an issue for me, and then that's not a good structure to run a decision-making program.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any further contributions? If not, I might just move one further amendment before coming back to Councillor Skander for his right of reply. I was remiss not to have incorporated this, to propose this earlier. I have received requests from a number of ethnic community organisations for Council to assist in establishing a quarterly ethnic community organisations interagency to encourage information sharing and cooperation. There's not currently one. I'm not proposing that Council should take sole responsibility for convening it, but simply that we take the lead in bringing other organisations together to establish it, and I'll just provide that wording to the minute taken now so that it can be prepared by the time Councillor Skander has completed his right of reply. Councillor Skander.
Thank you. It is very healthy discussion, and I welcome all the very good contributions. It reflects the meaning of we are really working hard to obtain a very good strategy, and we try to put all the circumstances for it to make it successful. Let me say this. We've been in Marrickville running the multiculturalism and the sister cities projects for long. And we did that very successfully. Sometimes we have to go back and study what we did very well and what we were not successful at and add to it. And that was really reflected by the comments I heard from our councillors. So I welcome very serious discussion about it between the time from now till the report comes back. But let me tell you, I had different organizations already discussed that with me and gave me some ideas. I will not say it here now, but I will keep it for them to express it and really play a role on it. To Colin, I do remember very well that sister city we tried to hold, and let me tell you, Schwebel Street in Marrickville was the very first family who really were involved in this war and etc. And one of them, he came to the, if you remember, to the reception we hold, and he spoke in it, and he is there anytime you really need to contact him. Okay, comrades, thank you very much.
He actually lives around the corner from you, Sam.
Okay, now councillors, we'll go to deal with the amendments. So we've got the primary motion from myself and Councillor Iskander, which is the officer's recommendation with the additional points that I have outlined, which are the points 5 through 6. No, 5 through 7. Yeah. Thank you for that. Then we've got Councillor Stamlis. Did you table an amendment?
Do I need to? Or maybe I will.
That's your determination. We'll wait for that. Were there any further amendments that I've missed, Councillor De Cruz?
I was actually proposing in point 1 of the recommendation that it said refer to multicultural communities, not communities. Oh, here it is.
Okay, that seems a very sensible amendment from Councillor Stamlis. Are you amenable to that, Councillor Iskander? Yes. That's incorporated as point 8. Councillor De Cruz has requested that multicultural community be changed to communities in point 1. I'll let you provide the wording to the minute taker. Okay, there's no further amendments, it's just a primary motion. I'll now put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried with Councillor Rosidi and Councillor Passis against. Next item. Draft. Now, I just asked the gentleman in the gallery, the cutting lonely figures. You haven't registered to speak. What item are you in attendance for? You just come for fun?
Just for fun.
Just for fun.
I find no fun here.
You can watch it. You can watch it at home on the internet for free.
I find very
It's not even pay-per-view.
There is quite a sadness. Not fun.
Yeah, that's true. You're quite welcome, of course. Thank you.
It's what he meant to say.
If you hold out long enough, you might get an ice cream.
Thank you.
Draft grants and fee scale policy. Councillors, discussion? No discussion. Is there a mover of that? Councillor Kiat.
I note that the report, through the chair to the manager of community services, the report refers to some groups that may be adversely affected by changes, and that that we're going to try and work through those issues with them. Is the intention that we'll have a report back on how the policy, how the new policy goes with these groups?
I'll put that question to the group manager.
Through the chair, yes, the policy would be reviewed over the next year. However, as we work through with the community groups, should there be any significant or adverse policies that impacts that we would normally bring those to council's attention.
Councillor Stamlis, then Councillor Hesse. Did I get that wrong?
Sorry, I was moving.
Councillor Stamlis is the mover of the primary motion, the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. Do either of you wish to speak to it? Yes, Councillor Hesse.
Through you, Chair, and to the manager. The St Peter's Town Hall, we spoke about it offline, but what's the clarity? I know a lot of residents in the St Peter's area are concerned that is available to residents to hire for various purposes.
I'll put that question to the group manager.
Yes, in conjunction with the land and property strategy, which will be presented to council shortly, we're needing to make some refurbishments and do some sort of minor, paint works and other things. But certainly, as we call for expressions of interest next year for the group, those rooms will be made available, and currently are on request by local groups.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. Moved by Councillor Stamler, seconded by Councillor Hesse. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, revised public access to information held by council policy.
Aye.
Councillor De Cruz.
I was actually a bit concerned about the tenet of this policy. The key aspect of the GIPA Act is to actually make information publicly available in a proactive manner, and not to actually keep information hidden from the public. So I would like to move an amendment that information actually, that reports come back to council on the request for information and whether that information, the reason that information wasn't proactively made available on the website and required a request for the information. And also, recently a charter has been released by the Information Commissioner. Has this policy taken that into account? That was only released in June through the relevant officer.
Thank you for that. I'll put that question to the relevant officer.
Thank you. Through the chair. No, that wasn't taken into account at the time of updating the policy.
In that case, I'd like to also add that a link to that charter for public participation, a guide to assisting agencies and promote citizen engagement, be published alongside the draft policy for public comment. Sorry, so can I move the motion with these two amendments then?
Primary motion.
Councillor...
There's two options. Are you moving one?
With amendments that you provided for the minute taker?
Putting it on public comment, public exhibition.
Is there a seconder for that? Yes? Okay, so the primary motion is moved by Councillor De Cruz, seconded by Councillor Steer, with those amendments to be incorporated into the primary motion. Further discussion, councillors?
Sorry, can you just move the screen?
Councillor Porteous, then Councillor
Just a question.
Stamoulis, then Councillor... I haven't known you for very long. Councillor McKenna.
Just a question through the chair. The period for the exhibition period, how many days is it?
Put that question to the group manager.
Item 5, isn't it? Not item 3.
Item 3 on tonight's agenda. Hold on, I'll call the meeting to order. There's a question from Councillor Porteous, which I've put to the relevant officer.
Through the chair, the exhibition period is for 4 weeks.
4 weeks, okay, thanks.
Councillor Stamoulis.
A question through the chair. Would there be anything in our policy that would provide less access to information than would be available by other councillors? Thank you.
Other councillors or other councils?
Other councils.
It's a very broad question. I'll put that to the relevant officer.
Through the chair, generally no, although each application does have to be assessed on its own merits. So we would apply the public interest test to each application. But the intent of the policy is certainly not to reduce the amount of information that is released to the public.
Thank you. Did that satisfy your inquiry, Councillor Stamoulis?
I would like to repeat that. I would like to see ours as a progressive council, and I am always concerned where a council might seek greater restrictions on its public in access to information. So it's very important for me to know whether or not we would have less ability for our residents to access the pertinent information that they need. Would that be the case if I compared us against Parramatta or City of Sydney or wherever? Thank you.
Put that question to the officer.
Through the chair, no, that would not be the case.
Councillor, just for a point of clarification for myself, there is actually you can't just move the recommendation, because the recommendation is that we make a determination in point 1 about one option or another. Council receives and notes the revised Inner West Council Agency Information Guide, and Council determines whether to place the revised public access to information held by Council policy on public exhibition, and if so, determines the duration of the exhibition.
I think Marion was trying to say what?
That was the point I was asking the question.
Okay. Option 1. Okay, that is clear actually from the primary motion, my mistake. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor McKenna?
We just need to add the 4 weeks.
Is that?
Well, it says it determines the duration of the exhibition period. Well, we decided 4 weeks, didn't we?
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passis?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor to the officer, is there, I didn't read this fully, is there right of appeal if they're not happy with the decision from the council?
I'll put that question to the officer.
Through the chair, yes, there is a right of appeal.
Yeah, there is. If you don't mind,
I'll call the meeting to order. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Porteous?
Yeah, look, Leichhardt Council had a very strong policy about not making any charge for any GIPers, which was critical in terms of transparency of council and ensuring that there was equal access to everybody. And we retained that as a policy, and it functioned very well for a number of years on Leichhardt Council. And I think that's the kind of tone that we should be setting for the Inner West Council. So I'd like to move as a further amendment, and I hope that the mover of the motion would agree to this, that GIPper, there be no charge for any GIPers on the Inner West Council.
Okay. Thank you for that.
I'd move that as a motion. And look, I'd just like to indulge the council for just a moment, if you wouldn't mind. Ho mia famiglia qui dall'Italia. Ciao. E volevo solo dare un saluto. My family's here from Italy and they've just popped in for a minute. So, grazie, grazie. Can you get them to have a photo on the front?
Okay, that's very generous. Welcome, thank you for being here. I would like to flag my intention to speak against that amendment, but firstly I'd like to ask for advice from the author of the report about what fees have been proposed in this policy and the reason for the introduction of those, what I understand to be very small fees.
Thank you. Through the chair, we're proposing that we impose these statutory fees of a $30 application fee for formal GIPper applications. This is in accordance with the GIPper policy to ensure that the application is a valid application.
Okay. I'm just looking for a little bit more information about what inconvenience or poor process has occurred through there not being any application fee at all in the past.
Through the chair, the only instances I'm aware of where we don't take an application fees for informal GIPper requests. So I'm not aware of not accepting application fees for formal.
Okay, thank you for that. I won't speak against the amendment there. Further discussion? Councillor Passis?
Can I speak to that amendment?
Yes.
I believe that there is plenty of information available for residents from council, and if somebody really wants some information that is problematic, I don't think paying a fee is going to send anyone broke. You want to give 90,000 here for the last issue, you want to give money to Maliana, you want to give money everywhere, and now you don't want to take fees. You've raised the fees that much on developers, you raise the fees everywhere else. Well, something as important as somebody thinking they're not getting information and they want more, I don't think $30 is a lot of money. If you don't charge, you will have 1,000 people putting GIPers in every day. just to be annoying and just because something went against what they wanted.
Call the meeting to order. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Rocky, then Councillor Kiddo.
Just a question. How many GIPA requests are we dealing with at council at the moment?
Put that question to the officers.
I mean, generally, how many would we deal with in, say, a year?
Through the chair, roughly about 2,500 a year.
As in GIPA requests as opposed to informal or just requests for
GIPA
information?
requests.
Any further discussion, Councillor Rocky? Any further contributions, councillors?
Yeah, I have a question through the chair. I understand that the GIPA application fee, the $30 fee, is to lodge the GIPA application, a formal GIPA application, and then additional fees can be charged depending on, how large the amount of documents are and how much time is required to get them. Is that correct? So it could be much more than $30?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. The Act allows for additional processing charges.
Can I just get further clarification from the General Manager about the bureaucratic consequences of having no fee at all?
Currently at the moment, as you heard, we're getting around 2,500. I think we've got, three staff tied up. We've got 3 staff tied up in GIPA. So you've only got to double that number by not charging a fee, and you're going to have 3 more staff at $90,000 odd. So your cost is going to go up dramatically if you go down that track.
Councillor Kiat.
I'll speak to that now then. I think that if what we're saying is that removing the fees will lead to more GIPA applications, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing for our residents to know what's going on at council. Of course, the whole purpose of GIPA, as Councillor De Cruz mentioned earlier, is that we take proactive steps to publish information so that if a GIPA request is made and we have the information, all we need to do is point them to where that information is, and hopefully we can build more community knowledge about where we hold our information. But if we're saying that actually the fees are stopping people from making applications that they otherwise would, if they could afford to, then I think, that's an argument in favour of removing the fees, because ultimately we don't want just those who can afford to make these applications making the applications. So, look, I think that's a really strong argument in favour of removing the fees.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to speak against Councillor Porteous's amendment, and I think Councillor Kiat is misunderstanding the nature of the impact of the fee. It's not that people can't afford $30 to pay for the fee. It's that when you have no fee at all, it's easy for vexatious, for example, developers who disagree with council officers' decisions to put applications in which require hundreds and hundreds of hours of an officer's time in order to carry them out, because there's no disincentive at all. There's not even the requirement to go in and lodge a fee. So it's a nominal fee. I think anyone would say that by any measure. And the aim of it, and that's why I was seeking clarification before, is to ensure that you don't have powerful vested interests being able to run the council officers around and force them to go and do days and days of photocopying and to then deliver documentation, all for the purpose of a vexatious complaint. And I understand why you might argue that it's very good to encourage that process, but of course we're not the ones who have to go and do the photocopying or to carry the files around. And so I know, for example, in relation to the person who we celebrated last week, Ross, the former driver and one of the officers responsible for the files at Marrickville Council, I personally do feel some level of responsibility for making sure that people such as him and Officer Kennedy over here in the corner aren't forced to go and spend days picking up files for some developer who has simply decided, because the council's left a loophole in which there's not even a nominal fee to put in a freedom of information request, that they can get our public servants acting as their personal servants to go and get their files. So I know, notwithstanding the obvious level of governmental expertise that is in this room, that might be something that you haven't thought through, that there'd be unintended consequences, not for the elected representatives and the politicians, but for the people who actually do the work. And so for that reason, I think the $30 nominal fee is reasonable. It's not prohibitive. No one who's seeking to get information from the council will be prevented from doing so because of the $30 fee. But we might see that people on low to moderate incomes who are working for the council don't have their time being wasted by someone who's worked out that it's a loophole that you or the rest of us have created. So I will oppose the Porteous amendment. Okay, councillors, if there's no further discussion, we'll go and deal with the amendments.
Just to clarify with the amendment, I've been asked to amend the amendment. So I'll amend it to say that the first GIPA application for each resident be provided at no charge within a 12-month period, within each 12-month period. So I'll amend it to that, and I'm happy for. I know that Councillor Cruz would incorporate that, but I'm happy for it to be dealt with separately rather than to have it.
No problem. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Signalised. So we've only got one amendment. We've got the primary motion. We'll deal with the amendment first. If that's incorporated, if that's supported, it will be incorporated into the primary motion. I'll go to Councillor De Cruz for her right of reply.
I think we've had a good discussion on this. I should actually say I've had a lot of interest in open data and open information, and I think it's a really important thing that our community is provided with information in a proactive manner, and particularly in support of that report, so that we know whether people are being forced to put in requests for information when that information should have been readily available on the website. And just in regard to the Mayor's reference to developers requesting files, most of the development information is currently online, and that's no longer, photocopying is no longer really a requirement. The only time that photocopying was provided was when minimal documents were issued to the public in regard to the WestConnex approval about 5 years ago. So generally it's not photocopying, but I mean I take advice from the staff if they think that it is actually photocopying that is holding up the GIPers.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the amendment. I'm sorry, no, there's been the right of reply. There's no provision for a further question now. I'll put the Porteous Signalised amendment. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has been defeated. We'll now deal with the primary motion moved by Councillor De Cruz, seconded by Councillor Steer. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item. Sorry, I'm losing my papers here. Next item, delegations to legal services staff regarding appeals from the Inner West Planning Panel. I have a minor amendment to move, councillors. Does anyone have any discussion? No? If not, yeah, Councillor Hesse.
Yeah, that's actually a question, Chair, to the relevant officer. On page 139 of the report, it talks about such resources are currently at premium given the volume of appeals the council is currently experiencing. I was wondering why is there such a high volume of appeals at the moment? Is there
I understand that's the subject of a future council report following from a resolution moved by Councillor Signalised, but I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
Through the Chair, councillors, that's exactly correct. Staff are working on a paper at the moment to be presented to council in the near future that goes through that problem in quite some detail.
Thanks.
Councillor Hesse, any further contribution?
I'll see what you've got to move and then I'll consider what I was going to do.
Okay, thank you for that. My amendment is simply that the Legal Services report be tabled monthly at an ordinary council meeting to be considered in committee of the whole. The reason I'm moving that is that was certainly the practice at Leichhardt Council, in my previous experience, that the Legal Services report was part of the ordinary council meeting and that we would consider it in committee of the whole. That was a very useful practice, because it meant that the manager of legal services was available to answer questions frankly in a confidential session, and that there was an extra layer of accountability for the council legal staff, and also a very good educative and informative process for elected representatives. It has been noticeable to me that following the implementation of the Inner West Planning Panel and the enforcement of a new model for that by the New South Wales Government, that there is obviously a lessened level of oversight from elected representatives, and I think ensuring that the legal services report, which we're currently receiving via memo, be reported to a council meeting would mean that collectively we're able to ask some more questions and to provide a greater level of assurance and oversight of what's taking place in the legal realm at council. So I'll provide that wording to the minute taker. Councillor Hesse.
I'm happy to second that, Chair, and indeed I was going to move something that was pretty much exactly the same, so thank you for beating. That was good. I might just expand very briefly in support of that. I think it is indeed one of the problems. I think there are many problems coming out with state government's decisions on planning, and I look forward after the next state election to many things, including a review of the way we do planning in New South Wales and the way it affects local government and residents. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Stammells.
Mr Mayor, I believe that I asked that the Inner West Planning Panel provide a briefing to councillors at some stage in a previous motion. A question through the Chair, is there any further word on that?
I'll put that question to one of the Deputy General Managers.
Through the Chair, councillors, yes, the relevant development assessment staff are in liaison with the panel members to provide council with some formal feedback, not a feedback session per se, but a collation of thoughts and findings out of their initial term so far.
Can I ask a further question to the same end? Why are they not capable of coming and briefing councillors at a briefing session and providing a report? I was under the impression that it would be reported before now. We're paying them good money, public money, they're doing a good job. But, I mean, we're not some amateur society that are requesting their attendance. We're actually the people who appointed them, or maybe not with the state government. We're certainly the people who arrange their paychecks. And so I would have thought if we'd like a report from them and we'd like them to come and brief councillors, that that's a perfectly reasonable request.
This is through the Chair. The resolution that we have on hand doesn't request that they brief council per se, so we were preparing a report on that front. Yeah. And that has been principally delayed by the fact that the Manager of Development Assessment position is currently vacant and we're currently recruiting for that. So the resources in that area are stretched, to say the least, at the moment, that's all.
Thank you for that.
Can I put a matter arising,
yes,
Mr Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll
ask you to provide the wording to the minute taker, they're not scribes. Thank you. Further discussion, councillors? Okay, I'll provide the wording of my amendment to the officers as well. Perfect. Okay, so I'm moving the primary motion now, seconded by Councillor Hesse, with that amendment incorporated about the legal services report. Councillor Stamos, your matter arising could be incorporated as amendment as well if you're satisfied with that. That becomes a further component of the primary motion. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour?
Just a point, I don't see Councillor Stamos' further amendment. Can we just see it? I'm sure it's fine, I just can't see it. Yeah.
Sorry, I see something different too. You see? Are you able to see it now? Excellent. I'll recommit that vote. All those in favour? All those against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, item 7 of the August 14 meeting, item 21, item 5, this is very confusing, item 5 of the August 21 meeting. Councillor York?
Which one is it on this agenda?
EO Management Plan 2018 to 2022. What page is it on the business papers?
141 on mine.
Councillor York.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation that we receive and note the management plan. I would like to move an amendment which I've sent to the minute takers, hopefully they have. I understand that it is our role as councillors to note the plan, which is an operational staff plan. It's a really important document that provides the principles for how council provides an equal employment opportunity workplace as a major employer in our local area of well over 1,000 professional staff, I think closer to 2,000. So my concern and what I've included in the amendment is that in addition to the principles that are set out in this plan that we've been provided, that council staff through the General Manager begin the work immediately of developing some targets for some of the EEO target groups identified in the plan, and a strategy for how, as a council, we will meet those targets in terms of equal employment opportunities. I've also requested as part of that amendment that council staff consult on best practice with various groups that I've named, and that a report comes back to council on the development of the targets and the strategy to meet them by the end of November. I think this is incredibly important. As I said, council is a major employer in our local area. There are a whole bunch of very sophisticated things our council could and should be doing as an equal employment workplace, beyond the sort of reactive work of making sure that we're not tolerating bullying or sexual harassment and sort of the minimal foundational things. There's a whole lot of very proactive things we could and should be doing, and that I know the former constituent councils were actively doing. And I'd like to see this council pursuing those strategies in a very concrete way, and that begins with setting targets. So I'd like to request that councillors consider and support this as a first step toward ensuring that our council is formally, as an employer, taking on these really important matters of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. Do you wish to speak to it? Reserve your right. Councillor Passis, then Councillor Kiat or De Cruz. I saw an arm shoot up. Councillor Kiat.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, to the relevant officer. How many people do we have working on this in the West Council with disabilities that identify having a disability?
I'll put that question to the officer.
Through the chair, we've got 3% of staff indicate they have a disability. We don't have a dedicated person within the HR team working on the plan. We do have one role that covers off organisational development and workforce planning, which these duties and functions fall under.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiat.
I'd like to echo the comments of Councillor York. I think that this is such an important policy and plan for council, and so I'm glad that it's come here. It's a really strategic document for us, and I think that it is important that we do engage in consultation beyond the leadership group of our council, especially to groups that have extensive experience and understanding of equal opportunity principles and how these work in practice. One point that I think that, and I was planning to move similar amendments, but not as probably inferior. All I'd say is that I thought that it would be worth, in receiving a further report, that we receive comments from, sorry, I'm getting to the back here. If Councillor York is willing to accept it, I thought that it would be worth, in our report, receiving comment from our own staff on how they perceive that they're being treated at council and whether they feel that they're being treated in accordance with equal opportunity principles. I think that's a really important, I guess that's the most important stakeholder that we consider when we're looking at this management plan. So if I'll provide words to the minute taker to that effect, just that our consultation include allowing staff or it may be groups of staff to provide anonymous comment in relation to the EEO management plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Stamoulis?
Just very quickly, Mr Chair, before our hearing loop decides to ground to a halt, I'm hoping that at some stage we can address that. But if possible, another question through the chair, and that is, I'd like to briefly sort of understand how we went about the development of this plan and were staff involved in that process. Thank you.
I'll put that question to the Group Manager of HR.
Through the chair, the consultation was done when the workforce plan was being developed, because the EEO plan forms part of that whole holistic strategy. And the consultation was done through the group managers of the service areas to determine what their service areas would look like, what the diversity needs could be, the information we got from the 3 former councils' EEO management plans was considered, and what targets and goals they'd set. We also looked at the corporate priorities of the organisation in still developing up the organisation and gathering all the data that we need in relation to the statistics and doing all the HR protocols so that we can have best practice protocols in place to ensure that we've got the basis of the organisation right before we move forward with looking at the targets. The employment protections that we have were also considered because that limits what you can do in relation to the number of staff that you have within the organisation. And so when you're looking at the strategies, you have to consider all those things and then determine how can you use the organisation shell the way you have it and the labour force that you have and still implement a workforce management plan, because those protections are in place until 2021. And so that had a bearing on what this plan looks like. But obviously the plan can be reviewed in that period.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that address your questions? Further discussion, councillors? There's no further discussion. We'll go back to Councillor York for her right of reply, and if you could also address whether you are amenable to incorporation of Councillor Kiat's amendment.
I'm very happy for there to be a provision for staff consultation somewhere along the line. I wouldn't like to see the report held up that I've requested come back in November. So I don't know if there's words that we can say to the effect that provision for staff consultation be included in the report or something like that. I'm happy with that.
Have you concluded your right of reply, or did you want to continue that?
Yes.
That's it.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiat?
Yes, I'm happy to amend to that effect.
I'll ask you to liaise with the minute taker to ensure that that wording is captured. That's then incorporated into the primary motion. Okay, thank you for that. There being no further discussion, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Councillors, the next item is the General Manager's recruitment process. I'm going to move that we move into Committee of the Whole so that the matter can be considered in confidence. Councillor Passis will second that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Sorry, gentlemen, you'll have to depart momentarily. We have to turn the microphones off.
Darcy, yours is on.
Yours is on. That's what I'm asking, do we need to turn them off?
This is a long, don't you think that's a matter? This is true, I think.
That's very good. I'll ask councillors to come and resume their seats, please.
Yeah.
It is that.
Okay, we've now got a quorum. We'll resume the meeting. Councillor McKenna will move that we resume the meeting, seconded by Councillor Drury. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Up to item 7. I don't think we actually moved. We did? Moved out of Committee of the Whole? No, we did. We moved out of Committee of the Whole. I'll move that we adopt the recommendations of Committee of the Whole, seconded by Councillor Kiat. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Item 7 on tonight's agenda, Local Environment Plan Funding Offer from Department of Planning and the Environment. Councillor Drury.
Mayor, may I move this with the amendment that should shortly appear on the board? And I'll take this opportunity to thank the officers and once again thank those groups in the community who railed against our Macquarie Street friends imposing a so-called strategy along Sydenham to Bankstown. And the amendment just reiterates the point that we were none too keen on that, and we remain none too keen. I also think it's important for us to crack on and do the LEP. We have the opportunity for the townsfolk to have more say in the town plan. We have the council leading this process. We have an offer of $2.5 million, which is not linked to any population target. It's linked to doing it in a timely fashion. I think we have widespread understanding that it'll be very difficult to do an LEP in that time frame. And in fact, I don't believe any LEP in this state has ever been done in that time frame. But I understand the Department of Planning may have to tell their poor political masters that it can be done in order to keep the process rolling along. I think there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of benefits for us to get a fresh LEP. I think we can do that with a good process of consultation and discussion with our community. And I'm pretty sure we will come up with a great plan for our area.
Yeah, like the last one.
You're a sore loser, Councillor Passos. So,
You haven't seen it yet.
All the meetings in order was just that.
So, I think that we should get this dough and crack on with the process. I think we are conscious that this process does need to be done with a lot of technical work, as well as the consultation that needs to occur with the community. I think this money, it is going to cost us a lot more than $2.5 million to do the LEP, and a contribution from the state government towards that, I think, reduces the need for us to find that money from other sources within council. I'd urge all councillors to support the resolution as amended.
I'll be moving a foreshadowed motion, and that is that Council accepts the offer of $2.5 million funding, renegotiating with state government for 3 years. I think that it's very important that a task like this is not one of those rushed tasks. And I think to suggest that we could even do this task within 2 years is saying to me that state government wants this to be a quick and hasty process to meet some arbitrary timeline, which I think is unacceptable to our community overall. The LEP and the DCP are the documents that will guide us for decades ahead. They'll be the benchmark for future documents that will be developed, future LEPs and DCPs. And at the start of our brand new council, to suggest that we are going to meet deadlines for money, I don't think is showing that we're engaging in a robust process. 3 years to me would sound to be a reasonable time frame, and I think we should be negotiating this with state government. So therefore, that's the essence of my my foreshadowed motion. I believe that we should be seeking those funds, and in fact, I couldn't see why state government would want to withdraw those funds if we said we could do this task within 3 years. So let's get some meaningful thought behind this. Let's make it a robust process, and let's ensure that state government does its duty to assist in funding this process. And that is the purpose of my foreshadowed motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think it is obviously a good thing that both the state government has returned planning powers to councils at this moment, and joined Councillor Drury and yourself and others to recognise the important role our community's played in that struggle so far. I'm not sure if I'll put it in a motion tonight, but I guess we'll see how we go. Obviously, there is a deadline that's coming, which is the state election next year. And I guess, like a lot of people, I'm concerned that the state government is deferring making difficult decisions. It's hardly a controversial thing to say that. It's pretty commonly said in the newspapers, because it doesn't want to offend anyone prior to March 23rd next year. But I think that our community has a legitimate reason to ask a number of questions. That is, how many people the state government is going to require us to include in the area, and we need to know that before the state election. We also need to have a commitment indeed from the Planning Minister not to override council in its deliberations on the LEP, and that there is a commitment to actually fund infrastructure that meets the needs of any proposed increased population, and that's a serious commitment we need. I think those things are a minimum of what we need for the population of this area prior to the next state election. So I guess I'll talk to colleagues in the next weeks and months ahead, but I think we have to have this on record from the state government and indeed from all other parties contesting elections. Thanks.
I have a question through the chair to Councillor Signalised. I'm just, can I get clarification, Councillor Signalised? I note that the recommendation is that we write to the Minister for a further year for the project, which would bring it to 3 years. So I'm just trying to understand how your foreshadowed motion differs from the recommendation. Oh, sorry.
But it does say to work to meet the currently proposed 2-year project timeframe.
Right.
Is the only interpretation of the foreshadowed motion is that the foreshadowed motion says
okay.
Primary motion says that we should lobby to try and get a third year. The
Yep.
foreshadowed motion says we should only accept do you want money or quality?
I'd like to move an amendment.
I call the meeting to order. Councillor Catt, please proceed.
Yeah, and it's not radical or anything hugely substantial, but I just think that as we continue to work on the LEP project and wait to hear back from the department in relation to whether they will grant additional time, I'd just like to make sure that we do keep all components of our project as initially planned in view and work toward them. And then if we do not get an extension of time and we do need to abandon some components of the project, that they be clearly decided here in this chamber. I'm just not clear at this stage which parts of the project would be left off if we weren't to be granted the extension.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you want me to pose that as a question or that's a remark? Yeah. Okay. And is that an amendment to the primary motion or the foreshadowed motion? Thank you for that. Councillor McKenna?
I wasn't going to speak to this, but any ability of us to do this in 2 years is probably nil. We just take the money, and there are a whole lot of other councils that have been amalgamated that are going to be doing their LEPs in the same time with the same guidelines and the same, if you accept the money, we want it done in 2 years. We all know it can't be done in 2 years. Just take the money and don't worry about trying to get a third year. It's going to take 3 years anyway. They're not going to take the money back. And what are they going to say to us when we get to the point where 2 years is up and we're not finished? I just think that we're all being a little bit precious about the 2 year issue. LEPs take a long time. Everyone's going to be in the same boat. All of the councils doing an LEP at the same time, and quite honestly, it might take 4 years.
It certainly is. Okay, councillors, any further discussion? Councillor Lockie?
I'll just make a quick comment. I'll just say I think Councillor McKenna has summed up a lot of the sentiments remarkably well, as ever. Look, I was very happy to second this motion, particularly given the addition of the Sydenham to Bankstown corridor and the pushback against the way that was getting forced down our throats as a community, again, without any input from us initially. Yeah, is because we have, there is a recognition that from what I understand it, even within planning, that 2 years is somewhat unrealistic. Obviously, we are going to keep pushing as a council for the time that we need to do the job properly. And I would also note for the thousands of viewers at home that when we were briefed on this as councillors a few weeks ago, I know the point was made very strongly by many of us that one area we would not want to see compromised during this process was the consultation with our community. So I think there is a big commitment around the table that should take place and that we should bring the community with us on this, as the state government has so abjectly failed to do on so many projects in the inner west.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor, is there anyone who wants to speak against the primary motion or the foreshadowed motion needs to offer something more? If not, we'll go and deal with the amendments first. We've got the amendment from Councillor Kiat that we continue with the LEP project to include all components of the project as initially planned, e.g. affordable housing, design quality, creative industries, consolidated LEP, etc. If no extension of time is granted and some components of the LEP project will need to be abandoned to meet the 2 year timeframe, Council to receive a further report addressing the options for completing the project with and without the 2 year timeframe. I think that will happen automatically, but did you wish to incorporate that into the primary motion, Councillor Drury? Okay, that's not incorporated. Who was the seconder for the Kiat amendment? Councillor Porteous is the seconder. Did you wish to move that to the foreshadowed motion as well, Councillor Kiat? Well, I guess it's contradictory to the foreshadowed motion. Yeah. Okay, so we'll deal with the Kiat-Porteous amendment to the primary motion, and then we'll deal with both the primary motion and if necessary, the foreshadowed motion. I'll put the Kiat-Porteous amendment. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor, please proceed.
The LEP will not be done in 2 years. There is no one in the state of New South Wales who believes it will be, apart from the clowns who voted for this in Cabinet, right? And the Minister who had to pretend that this is the case. There is no one apart from them who believes that. Basically, there's a whole gang of consultants, all the councils, amalgamated councils going to be seeking the same sort of people to do the same sort of work over the same sort of period. As Councillor McKenna points out, it's not going to happen. We take the money, we crack on, we do the job. And we give it a go. I don't want to concede anything else apart from that. We get the money, we ask for an extra year, and we crack on and do it. To contemplate any more and put other caveats on it, I think just messes it up and makes us look naive. I'd prefer we just take the dough, tell them up, you know, we still think your Sydenham to Bankstown was crazy, and we get on with it and in consultation with the community. Let's simplify it and go.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the Kiat Porteous amendment. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? That's 10 against. That has been defeated. We'll now deal with the primary motion to accept the funding. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried with Councillor Stamoulis against. Next item. Council submission to WestConnex Parliamentary Inquiry. Item 8. Councillor McKenna.
Gee, it seems a long time since I read this.
It is.
Firstly, once again, thank you to the council officers for a good report and for the amazing work they continue to do in this very fraught area. This juggernaut that just keeps going, and the council officers just keep responding and supporting the community in a way that has been amazing. So I'm not going to go over anything. The report says it all, that this is the draft council submission, and we I support that and hope that everybody around the table does as well.
Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, just very briefly, I'd like to reiterate the thanks to the staff for the report. I would especially like to thank our officers for including such an emphasis on the health impacts, which often tends to get overlooked when there's any kind of reporting or discussion on that focuses on the economic or strategic impacts of this project. I would like to suggest, and I'm not worried about making these as amends, I trust the officers to do it, is that there are, if it's at all possible, to put any numbers around potential health impacts, because obviously we do have statistics around mortality rates and hospital admission rates that are linked to air pollution. I think that might help strengthen the report in regards to the terms of reference set down by the inquiry. And also, I apologise if I've forgotten this, because as Councillor McKenna said, it has been some time since I've read this, is that if we can put in our own figures as a council for how much money we have invested in WestConnex and WestConnex unit, I think that would also be a help, because it is a very substantial amount that otherwise we could have had towards projects we could have spent on our own area, which is not to say that that money was poorly spent. It obviously was very needed given the amount of support our residents have required and the insights we've gained as a result of the analysis our team has done on the various EISs and all the other documents that have come out of the state government for this. But so I think it would be useful to put that figure in our submission to the inquiry.
Okay, thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor De Cruz.
Yes, I think I'd like to echo the other councillors in thanking the officers for doing this report and actually working in the WestConnex unit. It is a huge and complex project covering lots of different dimensions. I've sent some amendments through to Catherine, and I was actually wondering whether it's possible to include some of the costs that council has incurred in relation to providing the facilities, and even I don't know that it's normal to provide a WestConnex unit for each of the projects, and so how much it's cost council to resource those kinds of things. So that's the main thing. I mean, also that council's had to attend and represent as an agency the reference groups. I believe there was one for M4 and M5, and then the air quality, which was one for the M4 and M5. So there was actually a huge amount of work that, and even just presence that the council staff had to attend and be prepared and briefed at those meetings. I'd also like that under governance, the community's complete lack of confidence in dilapidation reports. And I've heard recently that the community's had to retain lawyers and take WestConnex to court, not in our municipality, in our LGA, but elsewhere. The third point was poor public domain outcomes, and in particular, a very narrow shared path on Parramatta Road at Ashfield without a verge. You do a $17 billion project and that's all you get. Parramatta Road and Wattle Street are now much wider roads to cross. This is a poor outcome for our community who uses public transport and walks. Sorry? Yeah. The electronic sign, I think, has been installed in Dalhousie Street with an impact on the aesthetics of the conservation area, and it obstructs the footpath. The building of bigger roads to accommodate tunnel exits and additional traffic is poor use of very, very expensive land, and whether that's been incorporated into the business case or considered in the business case. And the motorways have been built at the expense of public transport. Sydney is a big user of public transport, and there's been a significant growth in that. Meanwhile, we're building a motorway. And evidence in Sydney and elsewhere that tolls have not recouped the cost of construction and operation of tunnels, in particular for the Cross City Tunnel and Cove Tunnel. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McKenna is the mover of the primary motion. Do you want to have a look at those amendments and see how you feel about them, so I can come back to you and ask you about whether you'd like to incorporate them? They seem quite complex. Further discussion, councillors? Okay, they're incorporated into the primary motion. Is there any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll go to Councillor McKenna for her right of reply.
Just briefly, listening to that list of extras that Councillor De Cruz has given us, when I was on Ashfield Council, sitting around the table with the powers that be from WestConnex, or was the Sydney Motorway Corporation maybe then, they promised that they would not put any signage outside Ashfield Park. Last week I got a flyer in my letterbox to say on Monday morning that infrastructure was being put outside Ashfield Park, and it was little blobs on a line. No artist's impression. And this morning I noticed right up against the park, taking half the width of the footpath, big concrete blocks right up against the foot of the front of the park. So not only are we going to have massive signage right in front of the park, we're actually going to have the footpath outside Ashfield Park completely obstructed from people being able to get past. It is just a disgrace, and they promised that they would not do that. And I think even Cathy Edwards-Davis was at that particular meeting, and when that was promised, and I just cannot believe the way they've treated our community and this constant barrage, and they don't even let us have a footpath to walk on.
Okay, thank you for that. We've just got one primary motion before us. All of the amendments have been incorporated. Moved by Councillor McKenna, seconded by Councillor Lockie. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda, item 9, Sporting Ground Allocation Policy. I'd like to move the primary motion with an amendment which I provided to the minute taker. I'll ask them to display that on the screen if possible. If they could provide the entirety of the amendment, that would be great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Councillors, I want to thank the council officers for the development of the policy. Obviously, it's very important, but also very sensitive and difficult to manage all of the vast array of stakeholders in development of a policy such as this. So congratulations and thank you very much to the officers for your hard work. I recognise that this is not the conclusion of the process, but I think there's some very good principles which are articulated in the report before us. I think it's also important to add a few more principles to the document that will go out for consultation and exhibition. And three that I would like to propose, is firstly a requirement for all sporting clubs being allocated council grounds to have a documented plan to increase participation of girls and women, as well as culturally and linguistically diverse and socially disadvantaged people. Of course, most clubs are already doing a very good job of that, and it is very noticeable that gender parity has become much closer to being achieved over recent years in local sport in our area and elsewhere, but there's still a long way to go. And this is not suggesting quotas, but it is proposing that there needs to be something written down by any sporting club who wants to have access to our grounds about how they're going to make sure that there is gender equity built into their processes, and not just that, but also attracting people from a range of diverse backgrounds. I also think it would be helpful to continue with our existing process, but also have an allocations review committee established, made up of council officers as well as members of all relevant sporting associations. Obviously, you'd need to have one for each of the 2 times in the year when allocations are being made, so summer and winter. This would not supersede the role of the council officers in developing the allocations, but it would allow for an avenue in which disputes could be mediated and solutions identified when there is a disagreement between the between clubs and the council, or between each other, rather than the first port of call being a phone call to local ward councillors and the mayor seeking political interference in the process. And I think from the sporting associations that I have discussed it with informally, there is some confidence that they will be able to play a constructive role to that end. I also think that we should be seeking to establish a process for local sporting clubs to be the lead applicant when we're seeking state and federal funding for our grounds. I think the brutal truth is that as much as state and federal politicians do like the cut of our jibs, they would much prefer to give money to community-based sporting clubs who have large constituencies or some constituencies beyond politicians. And so if there's a way for us to do that without compromising our plans of management and our infrastructure planning, then I think that could potentially increase the likelihood of us attracting state, federal and other funding for our sporting facilities. So I will move that way. Is there a seconder for the primary motion? Seconded by Councillor Drury. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor?
I'd like to echo your comments, thanking the officers for this discussion paper, and also for the process of consultation they went through with the sporting clubs. I've had more than a little to do with sporting clubs and associations, and I realise they are passionate volunteers, and the nature of their passion can sometimes exude into crankiness of decisions that are made. To be frank, I have long believed that it would be better for the associations to take responsibility for the bookings of the clubs in their area, and also for the associations who generally have staff and access to a bit more information wherewithal, to be the organisations that made applications for funding for parks. One, because their ability to look strategically across the area, the additional expertise and their capacity to get support from national and state associations. Unfortunately, that hasn't been supported, and I've got to say I think that is a real pity, but it is what it is. I like the idea of having an appeal panel, a review panel. I think that's great, and I really do think it would be great for local clubs to be the lead applicants in applications. I just want to point out that obviously we need the clubs to be mindful of the plans of management for the particular grounds. Most of the grounds have plans of management, or they should, or they will. And so we want a process which is in line with community expectations, in line with plans of management that get the sign off by someone from Macquarie Street as well, so that it actually works as part of a plan that is kind of agreed by the community. But certainly the notion of giving money to an organisation rather than a council, I think, is a lot more appealing to state and federal governments.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Hesse, then Councillor Steer.
Thanks, Chair. Look, in broad terms, I don't have any particular problems with what Councillor Drury said, indeed what others have said on the topic, although I would hark back to what I said earlier tonight. I think this is yet another area where we would have benefited from a much greater and complex engagement from councillors. I recognise there are quite a number of councillors around this table, and in fact many I probably don't know who had involvement either directly or indirectly with organised sport. But I think one of the things we again potentially lose sight of is the diversity of the way people enjoy recreation, both formally and informally. I think, and with an increasing population, I think we are in danger of marginalising the informal. I think the other thing is that question of who actually controls the operation of the sports grounds, and that too goes to that question of formal and informal. I think one of the things we would benefit from in a more workshop type of situation around this is actually having input from people who've studied this more deeply, as well as the clubs and that kind of thing, because I think for those of us who have been involved in sport, for instance, and I respect Councillor Drury's opinion on this, but nonetheless, we also know some of the problems with the associations and the clubs, that they are politicised beasts themselves. I'm not talking about party political here, but you get various factional groupings inside there. They're less than perfect. They actually need our intervention at times. And that's why I think a nuanced approach and a more taking the experience we've got around this table would be more useful. And I'm sorry, Mark, if you're groaning, but I think we're missing a fair bit here. But, you know, I think it's going out to discussion. That's a good thing, but we have to be careful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Steer.
Yes, I have a question through the chair, and
yes.
That is relating to the suggestion that we let sporting clubs take the lead in getting grants. I understand the reasons for that, but would it be proposed that there be an agreement between council and the sporting clubs in relation to allocation of the funds or management of the funds or something like that? Because otherwise, if they're just getting the money, what's in it for the council?
No, I'm certainly not proposing that. I've developed that amendment in consultation with the Group Manager of Trees, Parks and Sporting Fields, who's now in some Eurasian country. I've tried to develop it in such a way that it would leave maximum flexibility for the officers to come back and give us some information on whether it's achievable, to have them as the lead applicant, but without losing our the council's interest or the broader community interest. But certainly I wouldn't be supporting applications for funding. I'm not proposing applications for funding would then go to the clubs to administer. as opposed to us.
Thank you for clarifying.
No problem. Councillor Porteous?
Yeah, just in terms of that as well, because I guess that was my concern as well in the amendment that you proposed, number 3, was how does it get reported back to council so that we have some oversight about what is actually going to be proposed? Because I guess there could be, you know, as part of a funding application, it might require that there be a certain term where the club would have the use of that particular sporting field, and I think those are the sort of areas where council would like to have some oversight into what that might look like in terms of the overall impact that would have for other sporting clubs. So I'm just wondering if we could build into that third amendment a way of feeding that back into council before it actually goes to the funding application, because once you're actually making the application, you're starting to lock in the process, which we may or may not feel is the right way for council to go.
I think that's the intention of the amendment, which is deliberately vague and would require a further report back to council, but I'm entirely open to any amendment you'd like to make to that wording to ensure a better process.
Could the minute taker just capture scroll down to where that point 3 is? C. Is that the whole? I thought it was longer than that.
No.
Sort of
Excellent, very good, that's fine. Let's keep going. I'm happy to incorporate it. I'm the mover of the motion. Did you wish to speak against it, Councillor Drury? Councillor Drury is requesting, is asked through the chair for officer comment on the content of Councillor Porteous's amendment to my amendment.
Through the chair, we can definitely work with the clubs as part of the allocations policy development.
Sorry, I'll just call the meeting to order. If you could just desist for one moment. If you're going to ask a question through the chair, you will need to listen to the response from the officer. Please proceed.
Just through the chair, we can definitely work as part of the policy development through the clubs on developing a policy which takes into account the need to be strategic and to be evidence-focused when it comes to grant applications, which also protects council and its integrity in terms of our 10-year plans for park improvements, our plans of management, and the club's specific aims and objectives.
Okay, thank you for that. I won't accept the amendment. I will amend points C further to read, establish a process to be reported to council for local sporting clubs to be supported. That is, nothing would happen unless there were a policy adopted at this council, but I think that's a different thing to requiring every grant application that council officers develop to be reported to council, which obviously would be time consuming and limit our ability to attract funding. So I'll incorporate that. If you wish to move a different amendment, please feel welcome to, and we can vote on that. Further discussion, councillors. Councillor Catt and Councillor Stamoulis.
I think that the staff have done a really great job of sort of corralling all the groups together and to move this forward, and I look forward to seeing the policy, and including in relation to the amendments moved by Councillor Byrne. I think I want to flag now my major concern in relation to the policy, which I think we've discussed openly and productively, which is between, I guess, allowing clubs and associations to contribute funds and using those funds to improve our fields and the access that grants to bigger and richer clubs. I think that's a really difficult tension to navigate. And we're now looking to codify that in our policy, and I can understand the reasons why that we should have transparency around that. But I think it is nonetheless concerning. I think it's an admission that we can't fund the fields to the level that we need on our own, and I think that's really unfortunate. But that may be the reality, and But so that I think that my concern is only heightened in relation to point C of the amendment, which is that if we now have clubs as the lead applicant on a funding grant, how do we then navigate the fact that they may be the recipients of all these funds and may seek to claim ownership over more of the park? So I think that's something that I hope is dealt with in detail when we're looking at the report on the policy when it comes back.
Fair point. Okay. Councillor Stamoulis.
I agree with the proposal to set up an allocations review committee. I think that's very important, but I think the way to make the process more effective is to have an allocations committee in the first instance, and that is that it's not simply a determination of staff, as in point 3, but we also involve our sporting clubs in that process. So we would have an allocations committee, and at the end of that process, an allocations review committee. So I would like to suggest that the move of the motion advise me as to whether that's the intent of the motion, that we would have these two committees, or in fact it will be staff who set up the allocations only. So that's a question to the move of the motion, if that's your intent. Otherwise I'll put forward an amendment.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I got distracted. You're going to have to confirm for me again what it is you're asking.
So basically is that you've set up this allocations review committee. That's great. That gives an opportunity for the clubs to thrash out issues of concern. But I think rather than the staff make all the determinations, I think we should be setting up an allocations committee. So we would have two committees. One is to set up the allocations, and then number 2 to allow review of the allocations. And of course, both committees would involve staff.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll speak to that briefly in my right of reply. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Okay, we'll have everybody on that side of the chamber again. Councillor De Cruz.
All right. Could you just scroll down on the women's incorporation? Because I guess my concern is that women's clubs actually get a fair look in. So it's not really sufficient for a whole sporting clubs to have plans for women, but I think we'd like to see women's clubs get allocation, and this has been a long and ongoing thing. I mean, reading in the Annandale Council history that the Annandale Waratahs couldn't get access to cricket pitches and had to train in the street, and yet they delivered a cricketing sporting great who played for Australia both before and after World War II. So I think if we can incorporate something to make sure women's clubs are actually given a fair go in the sporting club allocations. I also had, I had amendments that I don't know if this is the right place to put them up, but it was in relation to the fact that our sports fields are in close proximity to neighbourhoods and that this causes conflict, and so that the sporting clubs be made aware of the impacts they have on neighbours. And also public transport, that the sporting clubs encourage the use of public transport to get to their fixtures and to their training. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you provide, I'm happy to incorporate reference to women's sporting clubs. Can you provide the wording of the rest of the amendments to the minute taker? You haven't done so already? No, they're not scribes. It's the requirement of a councillor who's amending a motion to provide the wording in writing. Councillors, I can't proceed at this point in time because Councillor De Cruz is providing the wording of her amendments to the minute taker. Oh, she has them. Excellent. Okay, very good. Okay, And if we could just go back to the primary motion, in relation to the gender equity, documented, a requirement for all sporting clubs being allocated council grounds to have a documented plan to increase participation of women and girls. I suppose that needs to be an additional point then, Councillor De Cruz, which would become point 5B. To include the consideration of promotion of women's sporting clubs. That'll do. Thank you very much. Okay. So we've got the primary motion. We've then got amendments from Councillor Kiat and from Councillor Stamoulis and Councillor De Cruz. I use my right of reply, there being no further speakers, to address some of those. I'm reluctant, having amended the having amended the officer's report to include a new committee, to then immediately establish a second committee. It does remind me of my discovery a few years ago that when you create the word cloud out of the Labor Party rules book, the big word in the middle in huge block letters is committee. And I don't want our sporting... I don't want our sporting grounds allocation policy to fall foul of the same thing that has happened to the Labor Party. It wasn't me. I didn't undertake it. I think it was a presentation from a certain General Secretary at Sussex Street. I also, if we could scroll down to Councillor De Cruz's amendments as well, I think they're unobjectionable, but I also think they are discernibly covered by Council's existing policy and practices. Consideration is given to the impact of sporting fixtures and other uses on neighbouring streets. By definition, that's what they do. Local clubs and commercial operators do need to incorporate the use of public and active transport in their organisation activities. They don't get approval, DA approval for use of a ground without a traffic management plan. So I'm happy to incorporate them, but I think they are obviously redundant. So I'll incorporate those into the primary motion. So we'll vote on the Stamoulis amendment for a second committee. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor, the only amendment we're voting on is Councillor Stamoulis' amendment for not one allocations review committee, but two. Is there a seconder for that? No seconder, that will lapse. I'll now put the primary motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next item, amendment to Leichhardt Local Environment Plan. Okay, excellent. I'm told that both this item, item 10 and item 13, Fire and Rescue New South Wales, have been identified as the two items that all councillors are in support of and don't require any answers, don't require any questions relating to. So ironically, we'll move in bulk those two items. Moved by Councillor McKenna, seconded by Councillor Lockie. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. That will bring us to item 11, Statement of Business Ethics. So for each item from here on in, I presume some of them at least are uncontroversial, but there is a particular councillor or councillors who have asked them to be pulled out because they have questions to ask. So I'll seek to go to them first. Item 11, Statement of Business Ethics. Councillor Kiat, I presume you think it's a contradiction in terms.
Yes. Yeah, the first line should be abolish. No, actually, I think I have a very uncontroversial amendment. I'd like to move the primary, the recommendation with an amendment. It's often commented, my lack of expertise and experience is often commented on in this chamber. And so the amendment that I move is merely to ask that when this draft policy go on exhibition, that we have some information in relation to what the previous policies of the constituent councils were, so that the good people of Balmain and St Peters can see what's changing. I think that's really important as we harmonise our policies, that we continually look back at what we had and what we're changing. And I think, you know, it is possible for us councillors to look at that, but I would also appreciate the professional comments from our staff in relation to what is actually changing, to draw our attention to most important points. So I've provided that wording to the minute taker.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. Do you wish to speak to it? Excellent. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the recommendation? If not, we'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 14, Easy to Do Business Program. Who wishes to ask a question about that or amend it? Oh, my mistake. Sorry. Yes. Yes, Councillor McKenna.
I'd like to move this recommendation that this go out on to public exhibition. Just a couple of questions I have in relation to the actual policy. And I note that on page 407, the procurement principles, which it says here is the ISO 2400 Sustainable Procurement Guidelines, and it gives a whole range of things, but at nowhere does it say environmentally sound. It's got everything else: accountability, respect for stakeholders, but as a sustainability policy, I wonder why we're not saying something like that in those, or are they something that we can't alter because they are the ISO 2400?
Would you like me to pose that as a question?
Perhaps, yes.
I'll put that as a question to the responsible officer.
Through the Chair, councillors, certainly the environmental objectives are set out in section 2 as a fundamental principle of the sustainable procurement policy. With respect to those principles set out in section 4, you're correct in that they've been identified under ISO 20400 and those guidelines, and those ones listed there are a reiteration of those.
Yeah. I understand that, and I understand the objectives as well, but I don't think they're very clear that, you know, that we're talking about the environment here and things that obviously sustainability, but I think we could be, and if you just go to the next page, 410, fair trade, the last paragraph on that page. Council is interested in the principles relating to. Well, I think we should be committed to. And on the next page, 411, in the middle of the page, further, by giving preference to sustainable products and services, well, I think we should be committing again to sustainable products. So I'm just hoping, anyway, we can change this when it comes back to but I'm just flagging that my concern about some of the language is I don't think strong enough. So I won't spend any more time on it, and we can change it when it comes back.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion to put the document out on public exhibition? Councillor Kiat?
Yes, I'd also like to move the same amendment.
There's no amendment proposed from Councillor McKenna. She's just flagged her concerns.
No, sorry. The same amendment that I moved in relation to the previous item. And I think I expect that when we do compare it to the previous policies that they will have been stronger than what is now going on exhibition. So perhaps that will come out when we have those comments. So I hope that's incorporated by Councillor McKenna.
Okay. Thank you for that. So that's moved as an amendment by Councillor Kiat. You willing to incorporate that, Councillor McKenna? Councillor Kiat becomes the seconder for the primary motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the primary motion? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Fire and Rescue New South Wales is adopted. Easy to do business program. Who's pulled that out? Councillor De Cruz.
I guess I'm just a little concerned that there's no cost assigned to the project, and that there will be some integration involved, and that primarily we need the council's websites to be updated and accurate with information, and that any integration is over and above that. So my question to you is that has there been any estimate of costs associated with doing this integration?
I'll put that question to the responsible officer.
Through the chair, any work to integrate with our website would be nominal. We'll just put some connections up. It's primarily a concierge service provided by Service New South Wales.
Okay, does that answer your question, councillor? Is there a mover of the motion? Moved by councillor Lockie, seconded by councillor McKenna. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Notice of motion. Item 15, Principles of Cooperation Agreement with Metro. Councillor De Cruz.
This is really a housekeeping exercise since amalgamation to adopt the same policy and agreement that Leichhardt Council had with the Metropolitan Land Council, who covers our council area as well as other council areas in Sydney. And I would like to propose that we open negotiations with the Metro Land Council to sign a MOU on principles of agreement of cooperation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by councillor Hesse. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Notice of motion, Register of Voluntary Planning Agreements. Is that yours, councillor Stamos?
This is just a very simple motion to ensure that that council and our community are kept up to date about what BPAs council have dealt with, those that are current and those that are expected, so that we're aware of what's going on. Very simple.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by councillor Lockie. Any amendments? No amendments? Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 17, Notice of Motion, Review of Food, Organics and Waste Management. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you very much. I did give the officers something. No, it has not in there. Last week, I gave you some changes.
Okay, well, do you want to speak to the motion while you're waiting to find it?
If they're there. If they're not, I can give them to you again. Look, this is a really great opportunity. This is a very, very topical subject, and especially since the war on waste is on another run, and of course they did look at this, the organics waste, in one of their recent shows. Council can look into this. They have the waste budget, which we can, which the consultant can be paid out of. The momentum's with us, and I clearly believe that council can lead the way on the food organics. It doesn't really matter which particular plan we adopt, whether we go for the FOGO or the FOO, doesn't really matter. The FOGO being the food and green organics, which they do at Penrith, or the FOO, which is just the food-only organics, which Leichhardt Council does in part, so as in some areas. It doesn't really matter which, as I say, which we go for. We just need to do whatever we can to try and decrease this incredible issue that we have with the amount of waste that's going to landfill. Do you want me to speak to my next one as well while I'm up, or no? Can I do them together? No. I was trying to be quick.
This is the problem when you're across so many policy areas, isn't it? I'm happy to second that motion, and I'd like to move a very minor amendment, which I've discussed with Councillor McKenna, and which is in line with the sentiments that she's just expressed. I think we should adopt an objective of leading local governments across the nation in the reduction of food waste in our domestic waste and landfill, and I'll provide that wording to the minute taker. I think it's really clear that from the outline that Councillor McKenna has provided and from all of the information that we have before us as councillors, that the really big leap that we can make in domestic waste is by separating out food waste and organics from what goes to landfill. Obviously not an easy objective to meet. I'm very proud as a former Leichhardt councillor of the program that we all supported in relation to multi-unit dwellings there, but the difficulty of merging that or expanding that and working out how we can make large-scale separation of food waste from domestic waste successful across the inner west will be a really difficult thing to do, but something that we should take on with gusto and have a really strong ambition to be a leader in the local government sector in that regard. So I'll provide that wording to the minute taker. Further discussion, councillors? I've just jotted it down.
Because I did have
Okay, well, I'll come back to that and I'll have a look. Councillor Lockie, then Councillor Hesse.
Yeah, look, I'd like to thank Councillor McKenna for putting this on the agenda. I'm very happy to support this and see this review expedited. I've had a number of people contact me since the War on Waste Special Ed asking why doesn't Inner West Council do this, and I think it's a very good question with probably quite a complicated answer, so I'm glad we're going to go and seek that answer in a shorter period of time. One thing I would like to ask, and provide an amendment for if it's needed, is my daughter's primary school in Newtown, which is Camdenville Public School. This is obviously, sorry, I should say this motion, I recognise this is the way to do food organics recycling at scale, definitely. But my daughter's primary school currently has what they call Food Scrap Fridays, which is a very successful program where they collect food organics waste, not just from the school community, but also local residents and people who use the Camdenville paddock garden. So what that's created is not just a way for food organics waste to be composted and recycled, but also a way for a local community garden to be set up to have the composting resources it requires happening there. And I think I believe they set that up with the support of council, and that's potentially a program that they could take. I should add as well that it links into the school's education program as well, so the children are very involved in collecting the scraps, in seeing how the compost is made and using that on the garden as part of their education as well. So it ticks a lot of boxes as far as council's community strategic plan is concerned as well. So I'd like to see this review also look at ways we could encourage programs like that and scale those up throughout the Inner West Council areas if there are other schools or community gardens who are interested in taking a program like that and setting it up as well.
Sounds like a good idea. Are you moving an amendment to that effect?
I can do.
If you could liaise with Councillor McKenna and provide that wording to the minute taker. Further discussion, councillors. Councillor Hesse.
A brief comment and perhaps a question through you to Councillor McKenna, if I might.
Yep.
The comment would be really to recognise exactly what Councillor Lockie was talking about, the role of, I think, particularly Jennifer Kent, who was with Marrickville Council and the environmental leadership team, which worked with residents who had good ideas on the environment, and they've come through spectacularly. I've been privileged to interview a person, one of the people who were involved with that program at Camdenville. It's been inspiring, and the great thing about it, of course, is it saves taking the fuel everywhere. You don't have to carry the waste anywhere. It's carried around the corner by foot power, which is the best thing. But it's given that, I mean, you mentioned, Councillor McKenna, and through you, Chair, the War on Waste program, which I saw and was inspiring, that Penrith Council are doing. I'm not sure what the point of contacting the War on Waste people is. Would it not be Penrith? I'm just wanting clarification on that. I was wondering what the aim of it was. Sorry. Through you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll put that question to Councillor McKenna as the mover of the motion.
Yeah, the motion was written before that show even, so it's taken a few weeks to get here. The Penrith thing is since, and the officers have said that you know, they would look into the different, and so whether we contact the War on Waste TV program, it doesn't really matter, one way or the other. But that was, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Kiat.
I've got a question through the chair to a relevant officer. I've been contacted in relation to a local preschool that wants to access our recycling services, and I'll discuss that in relation to the next item. But in relation to this item, my question is whether the current programs where we do pick up food waste, do we provide that service to any business premises or just residential?
I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
To the best of my understanding, Councillor, that's a domestic service only. So in Leichhardt, it's in multi-unit dwellings, and the FOGO trial in Marrickville, as I understand it, it's domestic only.
So
Thank you for that, Councillor Kiat.
A further question is just whether, through the chair, whether you would expect that this review would include looking at business premises as well as residential premises, providing this service to business premises.
I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
Through the chair, councillors, absolutely. There's considerable scope in the bigger, broader waste strategy that we're going to be doing over the next sort of 6 to 9 months, to have a look at what we're doing in our commercial waste collections, and what opportunities we have in targeted areas. So fruit and veg shops, for example, are a classic one that we want to start to target, and indeed some of those other type of uses that will lend themselves to that. So not every business, obviously, is going to lend itself to having an organic service, but we can absolutely include that in the scope of the work that we would be doing.
Well then, if Councillor McKenna is amenable.
Well, can I just ask a further question there, because I know in Ashfield, council doesn't collect any business rubbish, do they? So do we collect from businesses in Leichhardt and Marrickville?
Particularly in Leichhardt more so than Marrickville. They do offer the service, but Leichhardt has got the biggest commercial waste collection service.
Well, if we can add something about businesses, yeah.
Yeah, just...
We'll just explore the scope, councillors. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Getting more experienced every day. Further discussion, councillors? There's no further discussion. I'll just wait for Councillor Kiat to provide that wording. You're willing to incorporate both of those amendments, Councillor McKenna? Yes. Okay, they're all incorporated. The Byrne, Lockyer and Kiat amendments are all incorporated, become points 5, 6 and 7. Would you like a right of reply? No need? Just give the minute taker a moment. We just need to incorporate the Kiat amendment as well. Right, it's below, is it? Ah. Bloody hell, you're good. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Councillor McKenna.
Well, this is another no-brainer, and really it's just reiterating a lot of what we already do, but I think because of the issues with recycling and the problems that have been aired on various TV shows, etc., residents are asking, but there are some real issues that we have to overcome, and the issue of the quality of our recycling, and does my head in when I walk outside of my house and I see a bin full of cardboard and then plastic all sort of entwined into it. And I think, oh, I haven't got time to stop and pull that out. So we really have to work on the quality, and then, of course, on what we can do with it once we have collected it. Because I don't mean we just in West Council, but there has to be ways that we can value add to this resource that we collect in this country. And I hope that maybe by councils getting together and some of the issues may be able to be solved. We should be able to collect it to work it up here and remake it into especially the paper products. And of course, the other thing which I haven't, I don't think commented on here, and again, this is some weeks since this was done, is this dreadful problem with the recycling of bottles and the lack of places to actually do the recycling, where the state government is making a mozza out of the money they're getting for the 10 cents on every bottle or whatever it is that they're collecting, and there's not enough places to dispose of them. So the whole recycling thing needs a lot of work, and I commend this motion to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Is there a seconder for this motion? Seconded by Councillor Steer. Councillor Kiat, you wish to speak to it?
Yeah.
Had a busy night?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I was contacted by a preschool in Dulwich Hill who previously were having their recycling collected by council, but then they were, then it was thought that they were a business, so they had to go commercial. And I was confused by the comments, and I'm confused by all of the resource recovery, the patchwork that we have at the moment. But what Jan told me was that council does offer a commercial waste service, commercial recycling service in the old Ashfield area, but doesn't in the Marrickville and Leichhardt areas, and that's why we couldn't pick up the recycling from this preschool, who their provider did the same thing that Vizzy did to us, which was said, we're just not going to do it anymore. So I just want to move an amendment that we look at council's capacity to provide recycling services to commercial premises in Marrickville and Leichhardt.
Okay, thank you. That's incorporated. If you could provide the wording to the minute taker, that will become point 4. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the recommendation? Councillor Stamos?
It's basically, I don't wish to speak against it, but I was trying to get some essence of what this motion was trying to do and try to achieve, and what we wanted out of this. 1 and 2 are to note things that are occurring. 3 is to acknowledge and encourage our residents, but I didn't read anything in the motion or officers' comments to say how we're going to do that. And 4 is to produce a report, and essentially the officers' comments were almost close to that. So I'm wondering if I can put a question through the chair to the relevant officer. How could we use this motion then to develop something either new or to undertake some action that isn't currently being undertaken already?
Okay, I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
Through the Chair, Councillors, as the comments that have been provided there from the Group Manager, we have 3 very, very disparate resource recovery services at the moment, and part of the zero waste strategy that we're calling it, that's arising out of that, we'll look to align our services and also at the same time drive the Inner West towards zero waste effectively, and that's really the enormous piece of work that team will be doing over the next 6 to 9 months to bring to council. The very first step will come in the second quarter of 18-19, that will really start to look at what we can do there.
Okay, thank you for that. There's no further discussion. Yes.
Would this report include an upstream audit of what Vizzy and etc. are doing with our recycling once they get it? Is that included in the intention? I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
Through the Chair, Councils, I wouldn't be able to speculate at this particular point. That would be a conversation to have with the Group Manager offline, perhaps, yeah.
Thank you for that. There's no further discussion. I go to Councillor McKenna for a right of reply.
Purely for Councillor Stamos, really, as I said in my opening remarks, one of the real issues is the quality of the recycling, and that's that's at the root of this issue, really. How can we improve that in the short term? We want to get to zero waste, but in the short term, we need to find ways to improve the quality of what we collect, and secondly, to where is it going to go, and what is it going to? How can it be? How can we value add, or how can we engage with other councils to make sure that this resource is utilised?
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item is a condolence motion for Liz Butterworth. Councillor De Cruz.
So Liz Butterworth was a member of our community and a teacher at Newtown High School. And I think the point of this motion is to recognise people who have contributed to our community both as teachers, and I think we all remember our own teachers, and to also remember that the contribution she made to the fight against WestConnex up to the last moments of her life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for moving it. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the matter? Councillor Porteous, will you second the motion?
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Councillor Porteous.
Look, just briefly speaking about Liz, I think probably everybody here in the room will have known Liz. She was very, very active as a No WestConnex campaigner and a leader as well in her community. She was quite extraordinary, her organising ability. I remember, for example, a big public meeting that she organised a few public meetings in our town halls, but I do remember one particular one which was in Balmain Town Hall, which was totally packed out and had an extraordinary media presence as well at it. And I also remember a rally that she organised in Annandale, again, which was very well attended despite it being a stinky hot day. And again, generated some really excellent media. But she was there for the big events and the small events, for the pop-ups, whether it was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning because there was going to be some drilling in a residential street, and she'd be down there organising the local community to protest at the drilling, or she'd be organising the big rally that was happening in the city of Sydney. No matter what it was, she was there. And I think what was also really extraordinary, and I think which really hit us very hard as well, was to know that she knew she had terminal cancer for about the last 12 months of her life, and right up pretty much to about a week before she died, she was in there campaigning every day for her community. She never gave up, and she never gave up on her community. She just wanted to be there right until the end of her life, giving everything of herself to her community, because she truly believed that this was the right thing for her to do, to fight this terrible WestConnex project, because she knew how damaging it was going to be to her community and to the whole of the inner west and to the whole of Sydney. An amazing commitment, a wonderful human being, and I think that she's a real local hero, and it's a tragedy that we've lost her so young in her life. So I'm very, very happy to second this motion.
Thank you very much for that. Further contributions, councillors? There's no further contributions. I'll put the condolence motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor De Cruz and Councillor Porteous, for those contributions. Item 20 on tonight's agenda, notice of motion, Marrickville Park. Councillor Macri.
Thanks, Chair. Marrickville Park was recently upgraded, and for those of you that don't know the actual park, it's on a corner location with Livingston Road and Fraser Street, which Fraser Street becomes Sydenham Road, which is a fairly busy road. Part of the master plan was there was supposed to be some mass planting along the edges. So when children are around the playground with their parents, they were unable to run directly out onto the road. The mass planting was identified as a much more softer way to deal with the issue of the protection of the children. And on the other side, around Livingston Road, the off-leash dog park is actually very, very close to the road. There's been a number of dogs that have actually been run over there because they just chase a ball out because there's no barrier to stop these things from going across, and even dogs from across the road running across when they see the other dogs in the park have been hit. So it's just asking council to actually commit to actually finishing off the job that they've done such a great job down there and put this natural planting, mass planting barrier around to make the park actually complete and the whole job's done. I don't know why, no one can tell me why it was actually left off or bumped off the list of works, but it was identified and it's supposed to be done.
Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Iskander, do you wish to speak to it? No. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Item 21, notice of motion supporting use of keep cups. I reserve my right to speak on the principle that it's a request for a report and there's detailed information in the background. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor York. Anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor De Cruz. Yes? Yes?
I had a look at the Freiburg keep cups, and a core part of that was actually, it's a deposit scheme, so I think that needs to be incorporated into the plans. And the other aspect, have you got my amendments, Catherine? Yes, so that I can remember what they are. And the second amendment was that council work with Inner West-based coffee roasters on branding the cups. I know of at least 3 coffee roasters based in the Inner West, LGA, and certainly it's the coffee roasters who brand the takeaway cups.
Okay, happy to incorporate both of those. Thank you very much. Councillor Lockie.
Just a question. I had some discussions with council officers in our economic development team where they said they were already exploring a pilot to be done on this in Summer Hill. Is that actually correct? Like, have we done some preliminary work, I guess, towards doing this already, or...?
I don't believe so, but I'll put that question to... Did you say it was the economic development team? I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
Yes, through the chair. Look, it's very preliminary and it hasn't really been advanced.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's no further discussion. Councillor Macri.
Chair, it's calling for council to make a $3,500 commitment for this program.
Mm-hmm.
But I know in the report it says to get the report it's going to cost $3,000. I just think maybe we should just jump in and commit to the $3,000 and just monitor what the outcome would be at the end. Might be an easier way rather than spending $3,000 up front to justify $3,500. I mean, if you think that's the way to go, it seems to be a better way where people are guessing what could be outcomes. We're asking people to think about what it could be, what it might be, what it not be. Well, if it's only $3,500, it's not a huge amount of money in a $300 million budget. And if we think it's worthwhile, let's just commit to it and then let's monitor the outcome after 12 months and see if it's worthwhile continuing.
Do you mean in relation to the Responsible Cafes initiative?
Yeah.
So the recommendation is that council enter that and commit. I think the cost of the $3,000 that they're referring to in the officer's comments is in addition to that, and that's the cost of the preparation of the report on the reusable keep cup scheme, as opposed to joining the Responsible Cafes initiative.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I'll draw that.
Is that correct, Liz? Okay.
That's correct.
For that. Okay. There being no further discussion, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 22, notice of motion, Darley Road, signalised pedestrian crossing. Councillor McKenna, are you trying to send some kind of policy statement tonight?
Well, I haven't done much work this year, so I'm making up for it. And I'm sorry you're getting it all in an onslaught. again, everybody knows that we get so many complaints and concerns about traffic and about speeding cars and about the ability for people to cross roads, and this is a what sort of a road is it? A state road? No, regional road? Anyway, it's controlled by the RMS, so we are asking for them to consider again. They have got one of those traffic island there for people to cross, but that's not safe for people with prams. This is going to a major traffic route and a major transport route, and really important that we try and get something more substantial for our community. So I just commend it to you.
Thank you for that. I'm happy to second that recommendation. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against it? Councillor De Cruz? Go on.
It's related to Darley Road, but it's actually related to the Leichhardt North light rail station, where it's been brought to my attention that pedestrians are actually jumping the barrier to cross the road at that location to avoid using the traffic lights which have been installed at that location, because the traffic lights mean that you have to actually walk up one way and then back down the other way. So we actually, to include in the motion a letter to Transport New South Wales to provide direct pedestrian access to Leichhardt North light rail platform via the Dan Murphy site, closer to the traffic lights adjacent to Dan Murphy site, instead of making pedestrians walk up the hill to City West Link to access the station, or the other option is Charles Street. And failing that, to request improved pedestrian crossing facilities on Darley Road at the eastern side of Dan Murphy side of the roundabout. Now, the person who's raised this with me has actually spoken to the Dan Murphy people, and they said they're very happy to have pedestrians go via their site to the light rail stop. But on a light, that's on a lighter note. But on a more serious note, there's actually been, it's quite confusing why there isn't access through that site, because the lights have been specifically installed there to provide only pedestrian crossing. They're not actually street crossing. And the other thing is there's actually even disabled parking at that location. But even though if you park your disabled car, then you've got to negotiate this hill and up and down Dale. So I think I'm not sure why it hasn't happened in the past. So I hope Councillor McKenna will consider including that in the letter. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to her about that. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll go back to Councillor McKenna. Do you wish to incorporate that amendment?
Yeah, look, that's okay. It all makes sense. It's all the similar issues.
Okay, so that's incorporated into the primary motion, which is moved by Councillor McKenna, seconded by myself. We'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 23, notice of motion, abandoned shopping trolleys. I'll speak to this very briefly to say that I have investigated the matter and discovered that Ashfield Council did some very good work on how to address this scourge, as some people might describe it. And I would like us to get a report on how Ashfield undertook that work and whether that same model can be expanded to the former Leichhardt and Marrickville local government areas. I know that it's a particular problem in and around Leichhardt Market Town and other places. So it's raised with me fairly regularly by local residents. I assume other councillors in the room tonight are in the same boat. I note that the officer's comment suggests that this could be reported back in 6 months, I believe. That was my recollection. I think that's a bit lengthy. We're only looking for an outline of the policy that was adopted previously at Ashfield. Any of the former Ashfield councillors could be consulted on that if there needs any input. And so I'm going to suggest that we amend it to require a report back within 3 months. I think that's fair and reasonable, not asking for the for war and peace. So I will move that way. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. Is anyone who wishes to speak against the recommendation? An amendment? No?
Just a point, at the SS Rock meeting, this actually came up as an issue and there was some discussion about it. I'm just, as I recall, they were going to make further investigation. I'm just wondering if we could also just incorporate any findings that SS Rock has with regard to this, to include them in that report as well. Would be
Sounds like a good idea. So point 3 would be amended to say, using the information obtained in points 1 and 2 above, initiate a review of the former Ashfield Council abandoned shopping trolleys policy and SS Rock recommendations. Thank you for that. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 24, notice of motion, Portuguese community collaboration. Councillor Iskander.
As you know, we are really developing very important strategy for the multicultural society in Inner West, and this is one of them. The fact is this particular issue being discussed with the minister from overseas and the ambassador and the consul general. The community were there in both sides, the Portuguese Fraser Club and Madeira Club, and they got together to develop a way how we can work together and improve working together to keep the heritage of the Portuguese in the Inner West. They suggested that we establish in 180 days an institution to do work together and how to do it. And we are very happy at that time that we will be working together, and the mayor himself and me were representing the Inner West side, and we were happy with what was suggested. At the end, we're going to achieve a better relationship, and our community from Portuguese and other multicultural communities in the Inner West will be benefit a lot from this. So I really like to ask you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd like to second the recommendation and thank Councillor Iskander for drafting it and for his work on development of the policy. Councillors will be aware that previously we have resolved and entered into an agreement with the Portuguese government in relation to Petersham in particular, to try and uphold and celebrate and build upon the Portuguese heritage within Petersham. Following the signing of that agreement, Councillor Iskander and myself met with the Consular General, who has since departed back to Portugal, but made a number of suggestions which are not really cost impositions on Council, but things that might be able to be achieved through collaboration between Council, state government agencies such as Sydney Trains, potentially the Petersham RSL through the redevelopment of their site, and Portuguese-based businesses within Petersham. I think this is a very constructive motion, and I want to congratulate and thank Councillor Iskander for putting it forward, and I hope that everyone can support it so that we can take some practical measures to solidify Petersham's reputation as the little Portugal of Sydney. Is there anyone who wishes to amend or speak against the recommendation? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 25, notice of motion, Lewis Herman Reserve. Councillor Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also continue to thank the officers and the officers who work in the not Parks and Gardens, Parks and Recreation, for the work that they do. Lewis Herman Reserve was something I think we got an agreement from, I think it was in the RTA probably about a decade. Yeah, probably about a decade ago. There was a block of land that we thought we could add to our open space in the central part of Ashfield. It's a block of land that abuts a nursing home, and there were some really great ideas at kind of working in with them. And I think we're going to throw dogs in the mix. Lucy, Councillor McKenna would be pleased. We'll throw a couple of dogs in the mix, get the oldies out there, and have another green space, because there are limited capacity for making new green space in inner parts of Sydney. So some tremendous work was then done by, I believe it was the then Mayor of the day, who may wear the same colour as I do, who got our friends of the RCA to give us the land. Now that land has been held up in coming over. One, because of the nasty substances in it. Two, because of the over-elaborate bureaucratic processes that the organisation proceeds. I'm recently advised that we move closer towards getting formal concurrence from the RMS in relation to handing this over. That is great news. I think it doesn't hurt to continue to write off to the Minister anticipating this, because this will be another great addition of new green space to the Inner West Council's portfolio.
Thank you very much for that. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor McKenna will second it. Anyone who wishes to amend it or speak against it? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Councillors, before we move to go into Committee of the Whole, I will make note of the fact that the proceedings do seem to be conducted much more efficiently when there are no speakers in the gallery, and perhaps that is evidence of the fact that it's not a bad idea to suspend standing orders and hear from all of those speakers so that they can get home to their families and the business can be conducted efficiently. I'll acknowledge that as a very good interjection. I'll move that we move into Committee of the Whole. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Porteous. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.